you for joining this session. This webinar is entitled Assessment for Learning and Promethean LRSA. Carrying on from a session we ran previously, we are now going to look at how to put the ideas to use in your classroom in very easy steps. With only 30 minutes, we will first focus on what AFL looks like, which many of you will probably already be doing in your classrooms, and then provide some quick ideas on how you can add LRS techniques to your existing lessons. Today's presenter is Samantha Clues. On the screen now, you will see the areas that Sam is going to cover with you. As always with Active Inspire, we will also be showing you extra functions as well. As this is the last session in our series for this calendar year, we have used tips and tricks that we have previously covered in other webinars. As teachers, we know that repetition strengthens those connections and helps you, as our students, remember those brilliant tips. Okay, Sam, please get us started.
Thanks very much, Janice. So firstly, in this session, I wanted to take a minute to talk about assessment in general and how it's changed over time. I personally remember doing a school project where I was asked to speak to my grandparents about what school was like for them. I'm sure something similar still happens now. My grandmother painted a picture of a very regimented program of learning. Pupils were quiet, sometimes through fear of the cane, but mostly through respect for the teacher. Lessons were delivered from the front on a chalkboard, and students took notes. When it came to tests, these happened at the end of the term and a grade was issued. This is summative assessment. And that was it. They did just a grade, no comments, guidelines or praise. Now that was in stark contrast to my school life where I was an individual, someone the teacher knew and understood, and I could talk to my teachers and ask questions. We didn't learn everything by rote. We were given comments, and that was formative assessment. The challenge now is to amalgamate the two, but also learn from those comments and do something with them. And ultimately understand who those comments are for. Do they inform the student? Well, yes, obviously. But they also inform the teacher, and that forms the principle of assessment for learning. You can see underneath, I've brought up a definition of assessment for learning, just for those of you that may not be familiar with it. I'm just going to take the fill tool here and fill in some of the key terms, some of the real great principles of assessment for learning that I want to highlight. So firstly, we want to create learners that are self-regulating. So the teacher doesn't have to be standing at the front directing the lesson all the time. We want to create learners that are confident to continue with their learning when they're outside of the classroom. We want to continually check on how students are progressing, not just like my grandmother at the beginning of a unit of work. We want to give feedback to the learners. Now that can be verbal, often is as parts of comments, and that feedback shouldn't just be about the work that they're doing, but also about how to improve, which brings it on to what quality work looks like. So we want to tell students how they can get their work to be the next grade, the next level, how to improve it. And finally, we want the learning to continue at all stages. It doesn't really matter where they are in school, in their particular grade level, what ability they are. We just want learning to progress continuously. So imagine that you are taking a driving test, just like we have here, this little cartoon that I found. And your instructor can give you advice, but only in the form of grades or marks, just like my grandmother got. Now, at the end of the whole lesson, you are told, starting and stopping, 4%, signalling, 25%, awareness of others on the road, 17%, using the handbrake, 88%, and so on. What you might understand as a learner is that apart from using the handbrake, you shouldn't actually be behind the wheel at all, and you could do with going and renewing your bus pass. That's because in all learning environments, be it school, home, driving, work, sport, any aspect of learning, we as students, and that we include ourselves in there as well as our students, need clear direction. And that is what assessment for learning is all about. Now, for the purposes of this webinar, I've split it into two sections. What we need to understand as learners before the lesson. So what am I learning? What will I be doing? And how will I know I'm successful? Often, this takes the shape of this type of activity. So we tell our students the curriculum area, so that's what I am learning, in this instance, the modern world. What will I be doing as my learning intention, and how will I know if I'm successful under success criteria? Now, the terms learning intention, success criteria, the curriculum area, there's lots of different terms. My specific school used learning objectives, tasks, and then success criteria, so students would know what they were doing. And they're interchangeable. Some schools use WALT or WILT and WILT, what I will learn, what I have learned, etc. But the whole idea is that we're telling our students what we want them to do, how we're going to get there, and how will they know that they've achieved that. The second area then is to look at after the lesson. What did you do well, and how do you know you did it well? And that relates to the success criteria. So you say, what did I do well, and how can I grade myself against this criteria? What could I work on? Again, relevant to the success criteria here. How could I improve? Sorry, and how can I make those improvements? So thinking about our own learning. So all of that is well and good, but tonight's session is about where Promethean's LRSA or learner response systems fit into all of that. So I'm going to reveal some statements, and I've got Janice primed here as well as some of my family to vote in to tell me which of the statements they think helps support the assessment for learning criteria. So which one of these that Promethean learner response units do supports the criteria that we've just discussed. I'm just going to reveal those. And hopefully I'm going to start that vote. And if you guys can vote in for me. So just one answer, do you think it's A, B, C, D or E? And just get okay, so we can see that everyone voted in there. And it's interesting because we've got a variety of results. So we've got one person thinks A, 2B and 1D. So if we just go and have a look at what those were. Now, actually, it's a little bit of a trick question because all of the statements on the screen are reasons why Promethean LRSA can support the assessment for learning agenda. So fantastic that we got a variety. So it does encourage everyone to take part, and that idea of communication, because remember we're guiding our students, we want them to be learners outside of the classroom as well. Definitely supports effective questioning. We can get some real-time feedback, so that idea of continuous assessment, not just a one big test at the end, and that it can be used as and when things arise in the classroom. So really good that we got to see that. Now, as an aside, this page highlights things that we have looked at previously. So we've got templates on the page, which was first seen in time-saving tips. And also I've used the fill tool there, which we discussed in the Back to Basics with Active Inspire webinar, if you want to go back and review those tools. So one of the key elements of assessment for learning is getting the learner to think about their own learning and for teachers to understand how their students are feeling. That type of understanding then informs teachers about how to progress with the learning and what direction to take. Now, I'm sure many of you have actually already seen this image that I've brought up in front of you. It's one of the first images I was shown when assessment for learning was introduced to me at school. The idea being that students identify how they feel about the learning and find a picture to match that. Now, in theory, this is a brilliant idea. In reality, however, I found that students didn't always want to tell me where they were, so they weren't really telling the truth. And also, there's quite a few options here. So my students needed some to be focusing in so that I could see how I can change my learning for the future. By using the resource browser, something we discussed in quite a few of our previous webinars, so time-saving tips, back to basics, and Promethean Planet, I've added some buttons here to help guide my students. I want to get a clear idea of where my students are and how I can evaluate my teaching to support them. Adding the buttons and using LRS has narrowed down the options, but this has created focus for my students. And because the software automatically saves the responses, I can choose to either view the options with my class as we're going, or I have the ability to take a snapshot and then look at it at any point. Now, Janice mentioned this on the previous webinar, self-paced learning, but you can go in and view, and I've done this previously in my browsers, and I can bring up my results. So I can see here that the class had said 2 are at A, 1 at E, and 1 at F. Now, what does that mean for me as a teacher? Remember that assessment for learning is fantastic for making sure that our students know how to progress, but we as teachers have to understand how we use that information to evaluate our own teaching and the subsequent lessons. So we've got 2 students at A, 1 at E, and 1 at F. So if we have a look, 2 students at A, so they're here, they're kind of climbing up that learning tree. 1 at E, kind of having a rest and relaxation, but it's pretty near the top, and 1 at F, like king of the castle up here. Now, for me as a teacher, that tells me that I need to start differentiating my future lessons, because I've got my classes split in 2. I've got 2 people that feel very confident about the work, that are up at the top, and 2 people that are struggling a little bit. So I need to understand that to inform my future classes. Now, this idea of taking a snapshot can also be based on the work that you're actually teaching at the time. Take this example, for instance. It was part of a lesson on glacial features, but we could use it to create any type of lesson. So in maths, we could have a learning grid or a learning graph. In science, it may be test tubes at different levels. In PE, it might be the number of goals that we're getting, etc. I'm sure you can think of your own. Remember, one of the tips we spoke about in time saving was creating templates like this and then saving them so that you don't have to create it again. You can use it, you can repeat it and reuse over and over again. So Janice, and I'm going to get you to work a bit again. So what I'm going to get people to do now is tell me where they think they are on the learning mountain, and we'll do this vote. And hopefully people will be near the top, otherwise I'll have to review what I'm doing for the rest of the session. And you'll notice that I've got the play button live here. So in our last webinar, we did look at self-paced questions, and here the questions have already been added to the page, so you don't even have to alter that if you do change the picture. So let's go with this vote. I hope everyone's still there and see what we've got. Oh, they're coming in. Brilliant. Okay, well everyone voted differently, which is fine. So I can see now that I've got 1 student on B, which is actually quite low down there. So no, I'm going to have to go and see who that is. But again, remember, it's what we're doing with that information as well. I've also got people further up the mountain, which is brilliant. So I'm going to move on. Now, it's also possible to use generic templates. Please don't misunderstand this session is that LRS is your only option. What we are saying, however, is that it can help support some of the main aims and keep your workload down to a minimum. This particular example that I found on Promethean Planet is using a simple traffic light system. Once created, you can add in your students' names and basically let them come up and tell you where they are with their learning. So the idea would be that each student would go to their name and select the particular colour that represents their knowledge of that subject. Maybe this is an activity that you do as they're leaving the room, a simple idea, but if we use it correctly, it can be very powerful and supports all those principles that we've been discussing, especially if the teacher then uses this to adapt those future lesson activities. Again, I should just point out that the tip that we're using here is hidden, which we first saw in the webinar Swing into Action. Now, I did mention talking about the feedback for students. Now, this is the after the learning part. This is the second part of the assessment for learning process. Many teachers do this in the form of verbal feedback, and I'm sure you all do it in your lessons as well, or written notes in our books, a sticker, for example. But what is important for AFL is telling students how to improve. Now, this example that I've found on Promethean Planet, again, by typing in assessment for learning, you'll find all tonight's examples. This particular page has 4 cards for students to think about. Each one evaluates their thinking, but asks them to also think about how they could do better. To really think about the activity they've been doing, the good bits and the bad bits. So by asking questions like, where do you think you need to take your learning next? Or, to move your learning on even further, I need to. These types of statements actually help students to think about the process that they've been going through. And this would be really simple for me to add LRSA to this type of activity. So if I wanted students to decide which sticker was best for them, I could very simply use my buttons here found in Lesson Building Tools and just drag them up to the 4 buttons. I could also ask my students to tell me how they will improve using the text functionality that's available from Active Expression and Active Engage. That would mean I have a record of what my students think they need to work on. And if that correlates, can't say that word, with what I think they need to do, then obviously they're on the right lines and they've really thought about their learning as well. Many schools and departments have also used assessment for learning tools as a way to raise achievement on a whole school-wide topic, such as literacy or respect for others. Now, in this case, you provide opportunities for feedback based on a particular exercise that they were supporting. By using common statements across the school, students are more likely to remember the statements, to actually do something about them and be aware of their own behaviour or learning. Another key element of assessment for learning is peer assessment. And this can be done from class to class or student to student in the classroom. And basically, we're just looking at students looking at each other's work. Here, I've got some examples of students' work on a particular activity. And the sections that they were graded on have been marked on here. We've got one with high success, so the teacher can go through why this was a better piece of work than perhaps this piece of work here, even though all the statements were written. It may be that the student just needs to put them in paragraphs, divide things up a little bit differently, which is obviously very clear and structured. And those feedback comments are what the student can take away. Finally, because I am nearly done now, I wanted to show you this example of using assessment for learning principles and Bloom's taxonomy. Now, it was created, as with everything tonight, from users from Promethean Planet. This particular flip chart, however, was provided by teacher and learning consultant Leslie Ramsey. And I'm just going to open it up because everything you need is in here. So I go to the page browsers and show you. It's got all the backgrounds that you need. It's got all the learning intentions to do with Bloom's taxonomy, as well as the topic, which is the LRSA, that you would put in there. It's also got the peer assessment grid at the end so our students can take a look at their lesson. What I really liked about this section is the questions are posed for each part of Bloom's taxonomy. So if I just go to the page I was using previously. We've got to imagine that we've read the story, and here are the different pages of Bloom's. And we can click onto comprehension and it asks us specific questions that we can then get feedback on. And we can go through to the next comprehension question, which moves us up. So what is comprehension? This is what our students are doing. Then reset the page and I can go back and so forth. I can go to synthesis, describe, design and write a children's book. So it's just brilliant. All the activities are here, all the opportunities that you will need. Everything is put into one section. Really brilliant piece of work. I'm just going to go back to my previous flip chart. And I want to take a closer look at the peer assessment grid that I just very briefly mentioned there. While you're just taking a look at that, I just want to point out that each column has the option to vote. And we could use it to assess where the students think they are in comparison to their peers, or to take a closer look at each criteria individually. Now, it's vital to allow students to understand the specific areas they need to work on, but also to give them praise on the areas that they are excelling in. The matrix is also a great way to tell your students how to improve on this task in the future as well. So you're not having to write individual comments for each student because they can see how to improve from one section to the next. Now, I've edited this a little bit because you'll notice that there are two columns. There's the peer points column, the peer assessment, and there's the teacher point section. What I've done here is I've used the self-paced learning that we talked about in the last session on self-paced to actually put in a question for each of these 5 categories, so writing, content, storyline. And you'll notice that there are points awarded to each section, so vote A, B, C, and D. If I go show you what that looks like. So I've written, select the most appropriate option under each heading. And my students have the options 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we can see it all come down the side. They match to the matrix grid. And that way I have a very easy way of seeing how my students have marked each other's work and adding up the points to see if they match what I've done as well in my classroom. Okay, well all I can do then before we close is just to give you a few tips for applying assessment for learning in your classroom. So, first of all, talking about the learning. Try listening to yourself and what you are saying when you're teaching. If you are interested in what you're saying, it's going to show. And in all reality, why should your students be bothered? So make sure that you're talking about the learning, you're describing each task, and that you're interested in those things as well. Try and pose good questions. Sometimes the best way to do this is to get students to pretend that they are teaching younger students. That way you'll actually hear the questions that they ask each other. Use a longer waiting time. So next time you ask a question, try counting to 15 in your head. It sounds easy, but it's actually feels like a very long period of time. It'll actually only be seconds. But those extra few moments for students can really help. Apply a no hands up rule. So basically you nominate who's answering, just stops the usual suspects. And at the end of the lesson, try planning in at least 2 minutes for maybe reflection time, thinking about what we've done and getting feedback from your class about your activities so that you make informed lesson choices in the next session. And finally, I just wanted to leave you with this quote. Do please remember that they are always learning. It may not be what we're trying to teach them, but they are always learning, as are we. Okay, Janice, if you'd like to take us through the next steps.
Thanks, Sam. That was really good. I hope that everybody was able to get some great information out of that. So just to sum up, once again, we've shown you a lot of fantastic things that can be done with the Active Inspire software. Sam highlighted some relevant tips that we have covered in previous sessions, but also remember that we do have other areas of support available for you. Promethean Planet is there with an abundance of free resources that are teacher created that you can download and use within your own classroom. And you can look back to a previous webinar where we looked at taking other teachers' created resources and then adapting them for use in your own classroom. Also on Promethean Planet, we have the new professional development pages, and there's a lot of great information in there on using this type of technology in your classroom and also integrating it with other technologies that you might have. YouTube is a fantastic resource for finding little videos to get you started on things. There are some, this is where we are keeping all of the recordings from our webinars, so do please go have a look at some of the other ones that we've done and see if you can pick up some of the information that Sam covered in tonight's session. There are also a lot of other non-Promethean people, teachers, experts out there who have created some really great YouTube videos to help you use the software in your classrooms as well. There are also the Active Inspire help files available to you, and they're a great place to go if you're wanting to look how to do something specific. And just to finish up then, our contact details are now on the screen in front of you, so if you do have any questions following this session or any ideas for future sessions, please contact either Sam or I at the emails provided. We also have a fairly new Promethean UKI Twitter handle, and we would always love to get more followers. So if you are on Twitter, give us a follow and we'll give you a follow back. Thanks again for listening to our webinar, and I hope you found it useful.